hearty welcome to all of you from Pado, India. We are starting the third chapter of Class 6 History. Chapter 3 says, From Gathering to Growing Food. It took many thousands of years for primitive man to change into civilized man. It took almost 3 lakh years for man to change from a food gatherer to a food producer. But once he had learned to be a food producer, he advanced very quickly. The more control man has over his surroundings, the faster he progresses. Varieties of foods. Most of our food, such as fruits, vegetables, grain, milk, and meat, comes from plants that are grown and animals that are reared. Different plants grow in different conditions. Rice, for example, requires more water than wheat and barley. This explains why farmers grow some crops in some areas and not in other areas. Different animals too prefer different environments. For instance, sheep and goat can survive more easily than cattle in dry and hilly environments. The beginnings of farming and herding. We have already seen in chapter 2 that the climate of the world was changing. And so were plants and animals that people use as food. Men, women, and children probably observed several things. The places where edible plants were found, how seeds broke off stalks, fell on the ground, and new plants sprouted from them. Perhaps they began looking after plants, protecting them from birds and animals so that they could grow and the seeds could ripen. In this way, people became farmers. Women, men, and children could also attract and tame animals by leaving food for them near their shelters. The first animal to be tamed was the wild ancestor of the dog. Later, animals such as sheep, goat, cattle, and also the pig lived in herds, and most of them ate grasses. Often people protected these animals from attacks by other wild animals. This is how they became herders. Domestication. It is the name given to a process in which people grow plants and look after animals. Very often plants and animals that are tended by people become different from wild plants and animals. This is because people select plants and animals for domestication. For example, they select those plants and animals that are not prone to diseases. They also select plants that yield large-sized grains and have strong stalks, capable of bearing the weight of the ripe grain. Seeds from selected plants are preserved and sown to ensure that new plants and seeds will have the same quantity. Amongst animals, those that are relatively gentle are selected for breeding. Gradually, domesticated animals and plants become different from wild animals and plants. For example, the teeth and horns of wild animals are usually much larger than those of domesticated animals. You can see the difference in the picture shown. Domestication was a gradual process that took place in many parts of the world. It began about 12,000 years ago. Virtually all the plant and animal produce that we use as food today is a result of domestication. Some of the earliest plants to be domesticated were wheat and barley. Earliest domesticated animals include sheep and goat. Now we move on to the next page. Ways in which grains was used. It was used as seed, as food, as gifts, and also for storing. A new way of life. If you plant a seed, you will notice that it takes some time to grow, maybe for several days, several years. When people began growing plants, it meant that they had to stay in the same place for a long time, looking after the plants, watering them, weeding, driving away animals and birds, till the grain ripened, and then the grain had to be used carefully. As grain had to be stored for both food and seed, people had to think ways of storing it. In many areas, they began making large clay pots or wove baskets or duck pits into the ground. Storing animals. Animals multiply naturally. Besides, if they are looked after carefully, they provide milk, which is an important source of food and meat. So, animals that are reared can be used as a source of food. Finding out about the first farmers and herders. You must have remembered that in the last chapter, we have identified some archaeological sites. Now, this is the map that they are talking about. These are the sites, archaeological sites, and these are Neolithic sites. Mahagada, Koldivaha, Chiran, Daujali Heding, Burzom, Mehergarh, Payampalli, and Hallur. You can notice that most of the sites are in northwest India, eastern India, southern India, and present day Kashmir. Scientists study evidence of plants and animal bones. One of the most exciting finds includes remains of burnt grain. They may have been burned accidentally or purposely. Scientists can identify these grains, and so we know that a number of crops were grown in different parts of the subcontinent. They can also identify the bones of different animals. Now, this is the table below where evidence of grain and bones of domesticated animals have been found. Now, this whole table is as it is very important for UPSC perspective. We have already dealt some of them in our previous lecture, but we'll be dealing with them in detail in this lecture. The first site that they are talking about is Mehergarh, which is in present-day Pakistan. The remains were wheat, barley, sheep, goat, and cattle. Koldivaha, present-day Uttar Pradesh, rice, fragmentary, animal bones. Mahagada, in present-day Uttar Pradesh, rice, cattle, hoof marks on clay surface. Gufkral, in present-day Kashmir, wheat and lentil. Burzahom, in present-day Kashmir, wheat, lentil, dog, cattle, sheep, goat, buffalo. Chiran, in present-day Bihar, wheat, green gram, barley, buffalo, ox. Hallur, in present-day Andhra Pradesh, millet, cattle, sheep, goat, pig. Payampalli, in present-day Andhra Pradesh, black gram, millet, cattle, sheep, and pig. These are some of the sites from which grain and bones have been found. These must be remembered. Towards a settled life, archaeologists have found traces of huts or houses at some sites. For instance, in Burzahom in present-day Kashmir, which is a Neolithic site. I have already discussed it in the previous chapter through the map. People built pit houses which were dug into the ground with steps leading into them. These may have provided shelter in cold weather. They have also found cooking hearths both inside and outside the huts. Depending on the weather, people could cook food either indoors or outdoors. Stone tools have been found from many sites as well. Many of these are different from the earlier Paleolithic tools, and that is why they are called Neolithic tools. Tools that were polished to give a fine cutting edge, and mortars and pestles used for grinding grain and other plant produce. Mortars and pestles are used for grinding grain even today. Some tools made of bone were also used. Many kinds of earthen pots have been found. Sometimes they were decorated and were used for storing things. People began using pots for cooking food, especially grains like rice, wheat, and lentils. They began weaving cloth using different kinds of materials, for example, cotton, that could now be grown. In many areas, men and women still continue to hunt and gather food, and elsewhere, people adopted farming and herding slowly over several thousand years. This shows that the change was not evident everywhere at the same time. In some cases, people tried to combine these activities, doing different things during different seasons. Now we will talk about their customs and practices. Archaeology does not tell us directly about the customs and the practices. Many of the farmers and herders live in groups called tribes. Now, what is a tribe? Usually, 2 to 3 generations live together in small settlements or villages. Most families are related to one another, and groups of such families form a tribe. Members of a tribe follow occupations such as hunting, gathering, farming, herding, and fishing. Usually, women do most of the agricultural work, including preparing the ground, sowing seeds, looking after the growing plants, and harvesting grains. Children often look after the plants, driving away animals and birds that might eat them. Women also thresh, husk, and grind grain. Men usually lead large herds of animals in search of pasture. Children again look after them in small flocks. The cleaning of animals and milking is done by both men and women. Both women and men make pots, baskets, tools, and huts. They also take part in singing, dancing, and decorating their huts. Some men are regarded as leaders. They may be old and experienced or young, brave warriors or priests. Old women are respected for their wisdom and experience. Tribes have rich and unique cultural traditions, including their own language, music, stories, and paintings. They have their own gods and goddesses. The distinct culture and traditions must be preserved. Even the Constitution of India has provisions for preserving the tribal culture. What makes tribe different from other societies is that land, forest, grasslands, and water. These are regarded as the wealth of the entire tribe, and everybody shares and uses these together. There are no sharp differences between the rich and the poor. So, it comes for an egalitarian society. Egalitarian means equality. A closer look at Mehergarh. Mehergarh is an archaeological site. This site is located in a fertile plain near the Bolan Pass, which is one of the most important routes into Iran. Women and men learned to grow barley and wheat and rear sheep and goats for the first time in this area. Animal bones from the earliest levels were also found. These included bones of wild animals such as deer and pig. In later levels, they found more bones of sheep and goat, and in still later levels, cattle bones are most common. We will be dealing with levels in the next page. What is a village? One of the distinctive features of a village is that most people who live there are engaged in food production. Earlier and later levels. When archaeologists are digging at an excavation site, how do they know which level is earlier and which is later? We will understand this by an illustration. Suppose people first start living on flat land, layer 4. Over the years, the surface will gradually rise because people discard waste material and generally stay and rebuild houses in the same place. After hundreds of years, this leads to the formation of a mound. So when this mound is dug up, what is found from the upper layers of the mound is generally from a later time than what is found from the lower layers of the mound, which are older. So these are old layers, these are newer layers. The upper and the lower layers are often referred to as levels that we were talking about. Other finds at Mehergarh include remains of square or rectangular houses. Each house had 4 or more compartments, some of which may have been used for storage of grains, for storage of important metals, for storage of important tools, and many other things. When people die, their relatives and friends generally pay respect to them. People look after them, perhaps in the belief that there is some form of life after death. Burial is one such arrangement. Several burial sites have also been found at Mehergarh. The person was buried with goats. The dead person was buried with goats, which were probably meant to serve as food in the next world. You can see the goats and the men buried together. And this is the picture of a house in Mehergarh. Yet another site we are talking about, that is Dowjali Harding. It is again a Neolithic site. It is in northeast. This is a site on the hills near the Brahmaputra Valley, close to routes leading into China and Myanmar. Here stone tools including mortars and pestles have been found. These indicate that people were growing grain and preparing food from it. Other finds include jadeite, a stone that may have been brought from China. Also common were finds of tools made of fossil wood, which is an ancient wood that has hardened into stone, and pottery. One of the most famous Neolithic sites, Çatalhöyük, was found in Turkey. Several things were brought from great distances. Flint from Syria. We have already talked about flint in the previous chapter. If you don't remember, please refer to chapter number 2. Cowries from the Red Sea, shells from the Mediterranean Sea and used in the settlement. Cowries and shells are usually used for decorative purposes and ornaments. And one thing that has to be remembered is that there were no carts. Most things that would have been brought on the backs of pack animals such as cattle or by people themselves. So now this brings us to the end of the chapter. Thank you so much. Please like, subscribe and share the channel and do give your valuable suggestions.